Welcome guys to another tutorial. Today's tutorial will be learning how to make a Victorian corset. Now this is our last basic pattern on female using this shoulder dart. Now if you don't have a shoulder dart pattern, you can decide to use your bust dart pattern. What you need basically are all the alterations and modifications. If you want to learn how to make it, this is a topic on my channel. And we'll start working with the front piece. I'm going to take another paper and I'm going to place it because we need the hip length. So I'm using the marking tape to just hold the pieces together. Then after that, we are going to be getting our hip line. Now from the waist length there, I went down by 8 inches. I did that on the other side so I can get a straight line. After getting the straight line, I'm going to be putting my hip measurement on the hip line. Now my hip is 42 divided by 4, we have 10.5. Now on this pattern, it has 1 inch sewing allowance, so I also repeat the 1 inch sewing allowance on the hip. Then I connect the lines together. After that, on the breast point, I'm going to be marking what I have there for my nipple to nipple measurements. I have 4.5 and I'm going to be extending it all the way down. I mark it on the hip line. Then I'm going to be connecting those two dart lines to the hip line, just the way you see me doing like that. From the breast point, I went up by 5 inches. Now the 5 inches is optional. You can do 4 inches, you can do 4.5 or 5 or even higher. It depends on how high or how low you want your Victoria corset to be. Now on that dart there, the 5 inches, what I have there is 1 inch, and we have 2 inches for our dart intake. So we need to replace the 1 inch back. Then on both sides of the dart, I'm taking half inch. That will now serve as 2 inches. So you connect it to where your shoulder dart starts from. After connecting it, guys, now we have 2 inches dart up there. That is to tighten our over bust. After that, guys, because it is a straight line over bust, I'm just going to be extending that line up to the center front like that. Then we are also going to extend this other darts. So you take your curve ruler in an S-like form, so just place it that way and you extend it. So can you see how I extended this? Now let's continue. So on the waist length, I'm going to be going down by 3 inches on the sewing allowance part, on the side seam part. Then for the center front, I went down by 6 inches plus half, that is 6.5. On this side is 3 inches plus half. The half is for joining, that's 3.5. Now whatever we have for our bust dart there, I repeat it on that point. Now it was 4.5, I mark 4.5 there. Then on the under bust length, I mark 2 inches. So I went ahead to reduce that 4.5 to 4 inches. So 4 inches is okay. If you are smaller bust, you can do 3.5. Then I connect it. I just place my ruler like that and I rule it all the way down. Extend it to the hip length. So we have our first star line. Now the next thing we'll be doing is we are going to be taking out darts because we need to do a lot of tightening on this Victoria corset. So I went out by ½ inch on the waistline. and I connect it down to the hip line, and from the hip line I took it all the way to the breast point just to blend the darts. That is what I did. Then on our waistline also, we are also going to be tightening that place. So I mark 1/4 of an inch, that is 0.25 on both sides, and I'm also going to blend it up to the underbust, and I'll blend it up to the hip line. Like I said, we need a lot of tightening on this. So after doing this, guys, we are going to be closing the darts so that we can connect our 3.5 inch to the 6.5 inch for the backs effect. So this is me closing all the darts, joining them together so I can connect it. Now I went ahead to take my curve rule, and before you connect it, guys, you don't have to extend it into your seam allowance. So I minus my seam allowance of 1 inch. Now if your seam allowance, if you feel 1 inch is too small for you, you can add 2 inches or 1.5 to your pattern when you're drafting. So I extended it that way. Yep. So after that, I'm going to open it up. When I open, now we're also going to tighten the hip line that way so that our back effects will be perfect on our body. Now towards the seam allowance, I came out by 1/2 inch. Then on the other side, I came out by 0.25 on both sides. So we'll be closing all our darts now. So I'm blending it up to the waistline, the 0.25 on both sides on the side. Then on this other side, it was 1/2 inch that I did. So I also blend it up to the waistline. Now I'm also still going to close it up. So watch the way I am closing it up. You close that way to that point, then you also close this one so you can also connect your line, because anytime you take off a dart, your line, you already have a dotted line, so you have to blend it up again. So guys, this is all the tightening that we've done. Now let's continue. Now towards the center front, from the dart there, I came out by 1 inch. Then at the hip line, from the center front, I went out also by 1 inch. You can see what I did. Now I'll be extending the line. That is also another star line, another boning channel. So we have 4 boning channel for the front. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. So you're just going to extend your bust point line, extend it towards where the shoulder dart starts from. Now we'll be cutting it off. So watch how I cut. Guys, if you know you've not watched the tutorial on how to make a shoulder dart, I'm going to drop the link in the comment section so you can watch and you understand. Then if you know you've watched it, let's continue. And like I said, you can also use any pattern you have, so when you watch it you really understand and you can do all your alterations. So what we are basically doing right now is to just cut off all the darts, every dart that we minus from this tutorial. We are cutting off all the darts. So we have our front parts ready. You can see them. We have them ready. Now let's drop this and draft the back. So I also take my pattern paper. What I did for the front, I'm also doing for the back to get our hip length. I went down by 8 inches, so I connect the line. Then on that line, I went ahead to mark my zip allowance because we don't need any zip allowance for this pattern. That's where you see the XX mark. So I put in my hip measurement plus sewing allowance and I connected it. So I'm cutting off the excess paper so we can continue with this tutorial. I'm just trying to blend my zip allowance line. Now the next thing is to get our darts. Now for this tutorial, the back dart is 4.75 because I added 0.25 to my nipple to nipple measurement for the back when I was drafting. So I'm also connecting my darts to that point. Just the same thing we did for the front. Now guys, to get the back boning channel, I minus my 1 inch of seam allowance. Then whatever I have left, I divided it by 2 and I mark the line. On the waistline, I went ahead to do the same thing. I minus my 1 inch, then whatever I have left there, I divided it by 2 and I mark. So I'm going to extend the line all the way into the hip line. Now for the waistline, towards the seam, I'm also going to tighten that part. So I did ½ inch and I connected it to the hip line. Now extend yours all the way up to the bust line so you can blend it properly. Now from the waistline to get our back effect, the same thing we did for the front, I did for the back, 3½ by 6½. So I just minus 8 inches from 6½ and I got 1½. That was what I did on this other side. So it's still the same thing. Then I close all the darts so I can also get my back's effects. Then I went ahead to roll it. You can see what I did. I also minus my 1 inch before connecting it. So guys, I realized I did not connect when I was marking my hip line. I didn't connect it properly. So I also minus my 1 inch. I just decided to blend it up properly. Yeah, so you should know what to do here, or you know what I did. So I corrected the mistake. Now I'm going to be cutting off the excess paper there. So we are basically done for the back pattern as well. We're done drafting it. So what's the next thing to do is just to cut off our shape. We're going to be putting lacing at the back, eyelet and lacing. So let's start cutting. So from the chest line, this is how you cut the back pattern. From the chest line, you cut it off. Then we are minusing the zip. We are not using any zip, and that is just the only outtake. We are not cutting off anything else from the center back, just the zip. Now I went ahead to label my pattern paper, and I also used the arrow to indicate that those parts are the one that is going up. Now I'm cutting off the remaining darts from our back pattern. Guys, we are done drafting the back. Now I'm also putting the arrow on the front pattern, because you just need to do all this so that when you are sewing it will be easy for you. I went ahead to write center front as well, side front, side front. So we have 3 for the back and 4 for the front. Now I match the side seam of the front and back together. I'm also going to start putting the numbers so that I don't get confused. Now that part, that's where the side seam is for the back. Then instead of that part to be 5, it becomes 7. Yeah, so center back. Guys, you need to watch this particular part. Even though you feel you are done with this tutorial, just watch it so you understand all the labels, and because it will be helpful when you are sewing. So we have them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. For those that might want to use a yoke, you just want to put a yoke to your Victorian corset. Now whatever we off from the upper part becomes your yoke. This is the back yoke and that is the front yoke. You can see where the yoke gets to. So the only thing you do is just to close your shoulder dart, or you cut it off and you seal it back. It becomes your yoke. So I'm writing the front yoke and I'm also going to write the back yoke. Our next tutorial will be the sewing part. This is part 1, that will be part 2. So I would encourage you guys to watch the sewing part as well. Like this video if you find it helpful. Bye guys.